Welcome to How to Deliver Effective Training in a Digital World. I'm Joyce and I'm joined today by my colleague Tori, who will be helping with the administration of this webinar. We're also being joined by Rosalind Stewart from Founders for Schools, who will talk us through how they move their learning services online. So we are from CAST, and CAST helps people to use digital for social good. So we work with non-profits to embed digital across their services, their strategy and governance. And we do this by working with sector leaders, with funders and government to make this happen. We are currently incubating a new collaborative called Catalyst. And Catalyst is a charitable network which helps the voluntary sector strengthen its digital capabilities. It's a coalition of funders, digital design agencies, UK government and the charity sector, and its main aim is to accelerate the use of digital in the voluntary sector. Here you see Catalyst's website. I would urge you to go and have a look there. There is tons of support and help available on that website, all things to do with digital. So what are we looking at today? Well, it's an introduction session in how to effectively deliver training if face-to-face is an option. So we'll cover key principles to help guide your work, and we'll also be looking at tools to help you do this. So it's all about how to design training when face-to-face isn't an option so that you can benefit now as well as beyond COVID. By the end of this session, you will have a sense of where to start and we'll have a roadmap of how to proceed. And if you are already delivering online, then this session will hopefully give you some inspiration on how to develop this and how to iterate. What we currently won't have time to cover is marketing and pricing.
So the next thing I would like to do with you is get a bit of a sense of how confident you are about moving your training online, and also get a sense of your fears and opportunities about designing and delivering online training. Now for this, we'll be using something called a Miro board, and that's a free whiteboard tool. I see someone waving, yeah. It's a free online whiteboard tool that will really help you to work together with other people who aren't in the same room. So we use it a lot for brainstorming and for session planning. And what we'll do is I'll show you around first, and then you can use a link to go in yourself and we can have a play together. So this is what it looks like. This is what you'll see when you go through the link, and it says welcome to our Miro playground, and it shows you how to use it. So the main things to know about is that the bottom right, there's a plus and a minus sign, and you can zoom in or zoom out through that. The Miro board is fairly large and you can move it around either by your trackpad, or you can pick up this box again in the bottom right hand corner and you can move that around. So this is what the whole thing looks like, but we'll be starting right at the top. Now, what you need to do to contribute to the Miro board is you go over to the left to the sticky note here, you click on it, and you can choose your color, and then you just click anywhere on the board and deposit it, and you can type straight into it. Now, if you want to make it bigger or smaller, you just pick it up in the corner and you can move it, make it bigger or smaller, or you can pick it up and move it around if it's not in the right place. Now, if you want to go to a post-it that's empty, because I've set up some post-its for you, you just double click in it and then you can start writing. So how do you get into your Miro board? And we see that somebody's already found their way in, which is great. What you do is you go into the chat in Zoom, and there's a link there. What you'll need to do is click on the link and open that in a browser. So the only way you can add to the Miro board is if you're opening it in the browser. So what you're seeing in the Zoom window is just my browser. Fabulous. I'm seeing people arriving. Great stuff. You're already having a go. So what we want to do is go to this purple box that says, how confident are you about creating online learning? And just pick one post-it and score yourself 1 to 5. So 1, not at all confident, 5, very confident. And the way you add to a post-it is just double clicking on a post-it. Fab. Loads of people moving around. So 2, 3, 2, 1, 2. 2-ish. Okay. Right. So I think the main point really is that at the end of this hour and a half, I'm convinced that all of you will feel more confident. And the thing to know about creating online learning is that nobody knows everything. And we at CAST are continually learning because things move along, new things are available, and you continually learn from one another through sharing, really. So from here, if you move on to the right, if you move your screen to the right and there's a big black arrow, you get to 2 boxes, a red one and a green one. That's fears and opportunities. If you can just put in 1 post-it for 1 fear that you have about moving your learning online, and 1 post-it for an opportunity that you can see for moving your learning online. Nice. So we see already that the fears board is starting to fill up. Worry about your own IT know-how, that you won't enjoy doing it, yes. Quality of content, absolutely. Can you carry over the quality of your face-to-face training to something online? Meeting the objectives of the course, is it going to be as effective? Clients not being tech savvy, will you lose your personal touch? How do you capture really valuable learning from discussion, so that interaction that you have in a face-to-face course? And technology is another one that's coming up there. So then what we can see in terms of opportunities, income generation from outside the geographic base, absolutely, yeah, because your face-to-face training, you have a geographic catchment area for that, don't you? So having a wider reach, saving time and cost, yes. Doing more with less input. Reaching more service users that you currently can't reach, reducing travel, accessing more people. So there are quite a few opportunities there as well. Fabulous. Thank you very much. Now let's go back to our Zoom window. So let's start by thinking about the first principle. So we'll have a look at 4 principles that we think are important for you to get going. and to keep sight of while you're translating what you have face-to-face to online. So start with your user need in mind. And we need to do that because if we don't, we'll end up with this. Now, the local council who put this gate up will have spent good money on this, time and effort, but obviously it didn't quite work because people find their own way of doing things. There was obviously a need for people to slow down because there was a road coming up, but this gate hasn't actually done that, and it's the same for technology. So often it's really well intended, it's well thought through and researched, and the actual technical implication is done well. So in this case, the gate will be pretty sturdy. It looks pretty well put together, but then it doesn't fit with how people actually behave. So all the work and effort is then not delivering the value. So before we have a think about your own users and their behaviours and their needs, I want to welcome Rosalind Stewart from Founders for Schools. Founders for Schools is an educational tech charity who, due to COVID, have also had to move their training into a digital space. Rosalind, I'm going to hand over to you. When you need me to move a slide on, you just need to say, because I'll be moving the slides on at my end.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Cool, excellent. I shall carry on. And Joyce, I know I've got 10 minutes for this bit, so I am timing myself, don't worry. And if I'm running over, just give me a shout.
Great,
so,
thank you.
Can we move to the next slide, please, Joyce? Okay, so Founders for Schools, I'm not going to read the slide out, I'll leave you to read that and describe what we do. So we're an online platform, and what we do is we provide an interface where teachers can go in, put in the postcode of their school location, and from that they will be given immediately a big long list of volunteers UK-wide, local to them, who put up their hand and said, actually we're willing to come and speak in your school. We've got tens of thousands of volunteers up and down the country, and the number of volunteers varies a little bit depending on where you are. So whenever a teacher puts that postcode in, they will get the number of people local to them within usually about a 10 to 20 mile radius, depending on what the volunteer is asked for. And we then have an automated process, and this is our usual form of delivery, that allows teachers to look at the different volunteers and the sectors they work in and pick who they'd like to come into their classroom and talk to young people about employability and careers pathways. That's principally what we do. So we come from a very digital route in terms of our delivery, but the important thing is that then our volunteers physically went into schools, talked to young people, and that's sort of our core delivery. So whilst the first half of our process has always been digital and we're very familiar with digital tools, the second half was always in person, though facilitated by the digital journeys we've set up. So what we've had to do during this period of time is to review the second half of our delivery, in effect. So move the slide on, please. Thought I'd put this up as well, just to sort of give you some sense of the impact that we have on the educators who use our services. Probably something to reflect on after the session, but I'll sort of ask the slide to move on now. But if anyone has any questions about that at the end, you can ask. So, what has COVID-19 changed about how we deliver our services? As I said, we have always been an online brokering service for real life encounters. So in order to continue with our real life encounters, what we've had to do is move to webinars in common with a lot of other people. Now that's provided us with a number of things we've had to think about. The first thing we've had to look at is hosting and moderation. You've actually seen a bit of that on this call today. So Joyce is obviously moderating and talking and explaining what's going on during the webinar to everyone here, but Tori's in the background making sure all is well and dealing with the comings and goings of the chat box and everything else. And we have the same situation with our webinars. The big difference, and this is definitely important to some of the people on the call today, is we also need to think about safeguarding and how we're keeping young people safe, because the target market and the people who are signing on to the webinars that we are currently running are largely young people. So we've had young people as young as 7 listening to our careers webinars over the last couple of weeks, and the oldest person on there has obviously been people under the age of 18, and occasionally they're teachers, but it's young people. So we've had to look at ways in which we can protect young people's identities, that we can control the way that people are asking questions to keep them safe, all of these things. And I think on this call there are people working with young people and people working with women in crisis, etc., etc. So those safeguarding measures need to be thought through, and I want to reassure you that there are ways of doing this safely, even in a digital context. Safeguarding's been a big thing. The other thing we've had to consider is that actually we don't want to throw away all the good work we've done during this time to be nimble and agile in our approach. We want to reflect on what we can take forward beyond COVID-19. There are 2 phases to this. So at the moment, what we're doing is we've been hosting all the webinars ourselves and setting them up and inviting young people to attend them, which is not what we normally do. So at the moment, we're transitioning to educators who've been attending the webinars we've been hosting and saying to them, see, it worked, everyone was safe, people achieved what they wanted to achieve, and it was effective. So now educators are starting to book the webinars themselves, and they're starting to do the job of the moderating, they're starting to do the job of running the back end with our support, etc. So we're trying to transition back to more of what we're doing in terms of educators taking the lead on running things, but that is baby steps. Move the slide on, please, Joyce. So what was the process we followed in making the changes? And this goes back to actually the first thing Joyce was talking about. We had to think about the people we were serving. So in our case, we serve educators, volunteers, and young people. So you'll see those 3 groups represented on the diagram in front of you. In our normal way of doing things, educators are people making the bookings, volunteers are the people putting their hand up and saying, yep, I'll come in and speak in your school, and then going and doing that. And young people are obviously the ones who are receiving the training from the volunteers who come in to speak to them. So we needed to talk to those 3 groups and find out what they need, and that's the first thing we did. So we got feedback from our educators and said, do you want this to continue? How can it continue? And they went, we do, but we haven't got a clue, you'll need to help us. We went to our volunteers and said, are you still willing to give your time? And they said, yes, absolutely, no problem at all. They were the easiest group. And where we could, we surveyed young people and said, do you still want to learn about careers during this period of time? And enthusiastically, particularly young people in years 10 and 11, said, yes, we're desperate to, because we need to understand how the world is changing and we don't want to lose out. A lot of young people are quite frightened at the moment. They don't understand what's happening to the world around them. We also need to think about safeguarding, which I've covered already, and we needed to think about sustainability and capability. Now, what I mean by that, by sustainability, I mean, is this something we can sustainably do now and for as long as we need to, or is this something we can only keep up as a month as an organisation? We don't know how long this is going to go on, and even when the lockdown is eased, there are certain things about this which will persist. So we needed to be sure that any solution we put in place, we can keep it up. And in terms of capability, sounds a bit obvious, but we needed to be sure we could do it well. There's no point signing up for something you're not going to be able to deliver to a high quality. And I think those are important things to think about and probably will be touched on later in the session anyway. Next slide, please. What have we learned? The most important thing we've learned is parent power. We as an organisation have, as you saw on the previous slide, had these 3 customers. From our perspective, it's been the educators, the volunteers, and the young people, but we've never really accessed our parent community before. And for us, parents are obviously homeschooling in a way they haven't had to before, and they're wanting their kids to be engaged, and they've been a big part of helping us to engage things. And you will find that your audience and your gatekeepers, the people who are helping you to access people who are working, will have shifted slightly for lots of reasons. So it might not be parents in your case, but it might be other groups, Facebook groups, where people are maybe sharing their concerns and worries. That will be a gateway to a community, all these sorts of things. But think about where that emphasis has shifted to help you deliver your services. We've also had to deal with unequal access to computing tools. That is a problem for lots and lots of people, but particularly in the context of young people. So we have had educators saying to us, brilliant, we'd love to use your services, we want the kids to sign on. The issue we have is some of the kids can't because they don't have access to laptops or whatever else it happens to be. The government is trying to solve that problem, but that is a challenge which is going to persist, unfortunately. We've also learnt that our volunteers were hugely enthusiastic to do this, and actually hugely enthusiastic to carry on doing this, because something I think everyone is enjoying is not always having to get in the car and travel long distances to do things. And in the case of volunteering, if you're volunteering to go into a school, even if your delivery might only be half an hour, the travel there, the signing in, the signing out, etc., it takes up probably about 3 hours. So volunteers are volunteering, I'd say, more regularly, because they're thinking, actually, I can do more in a smaller amount of time. That's something to consider when you're going out to maybe people who are working with the community that you serve. They'll be able to give more in an easier way, and that is definitely a benefit. The other thing is we've all learnt new skills in the team, which is no bad thing, and learning makes us all more capable in our daily jobs. That's a great thing. And the other thing we thought about is the next steps. So we're having to plan, as I said, we're already starting to transition to getting teachers to book events themselves again, but we're also thinking about how longer term we're going to carry on doing things. And for us, actually, we decided that we are permanently going to have a webinar as an option for educators booking through our site. We will still want to be moving back to the in-person options long term, obviously, because they're extremely effective. But something we've always had difficulties with is serving more rural school communities. We do a lot of work in Scotland, and there have been challenges, for example, in Shetland and Orkney, where they're incredibly keen to use our services, but they struggle because they are so remote. So we've got opportunities there to serve rural communities, and that's a longer term thing. But also, I think it's important to remember that in school communities, even when schools go back, the populations allowed into schools regularly will be very limited, and external guests probably won't be allowed in for an extended period of time. So we're just trying to plan for that as well. Next slide, please, Joyce. So the do's and the first do is talk to your customers and talk to your team. I would do both those things first and simultaneously, if you see what I mean. You need to understand what your team are comfortable doing, and people need to be honest about what they already have in terms of a skill set, what they're willing to learn, and how they feel about things. And you need to find out what your customers want, because if you decide they want something and they don't, then the whole thing's been a waste of time. I would also say you need to look at your competitors, if you have them, to understand what they're doing in terms of best practice. That depends on how collaborative the sector that you're working in is. As you can see from this webinar, collaboration is there. People do help each other, so do try and look at that. On the don't, and this is in no particular order, I'd say the first and probably most important one is don't lose sight of your mission. Don't turn yourself into something you're not, just in order to keep going in some way. It's important that your delivery is still who you are and what you're about as an organisation. Also, whilst it's important to look at your competitors, don't compare yourself. You never know what's going on under the surface in an organisation, and you might think, good Lord, they're doing a brilliant job, it's all terribly slick and this, that, the other. It might not be really, and it's just not a fun game to play with yourself, because you never really know what's going on. And also, don't panic. Everyone is in the same storm. We're not all in the same boat, but we are all in the same storm in all of this. And it's important to just try and keep things as calm as they possibly can be, if possible. Next slide, which I think is probably just, would you like to ask me any questions? Yes, it is.
So are there any questions for Rosalind? And I can't see the chat, so I need to look to you, Tori.
Yeah, there's Ross putting his hand up, I think.
Yeah. How have you found your volunteers on being able to pick up the working through these new means? Have you had to do much support for them to understand how to use sort of Zoom or whatever you use?
We are using Zoom. Typically for us, the volunteers who we've been working with up until really this week, actually, because it's been a process, have probably been our more tech savvy volunteers. So, but having said that, this week, on Tuesday, we had a volunteer who wasn't as comfortable, and all we did is we just made sure that they had a prep call, got them ready for what they needed to be doing. And we always ask the volunteers to say, if you're not comfortable, if you don't know what you're doing, please ask us in advance. We've only had one person actually ask for help, but it's really a question of actually setting them up on Zoom. What we did is we ran a version of, because Zoom, there are lots of different types of Zoom call. We ran a dummy version of a webinar with them and showed them all the different functionality and just explained how things are going to work to make them feel comfortable. So what I would say is, ask the question, give people the opportunity, and if someone asks for help, just do a dummy of things, run them through and make sure they're absolutely clear, because people are giving their time, so obviously you want them to have a good experience and feel comfortable.
And just out of interest, how long are your sessions with young people?
They are 45 minutes long.
Thank you.
Great, good questions. Are there any more? Okay.
Oh,
Thank
sorry.
you.
Sorry,
There
Joyce.
is,
Just
yes.
one. Sorry, just one quick one, Rosalind.
Mm-hmm.
Brilliant presentation, and it sounds fascinating. And oh, I might want to join you. Just quickly about safeguarding and sort of the monitoring of
Yep.
the activity. Down in the next county in Somerset, the local council were using Zoom for one of their council meetings, and unfortunately someone actually broke into it or managed to get in and started putting pornographic pictures up. So I suppose if you're putting the information out, and I've got to, sorry about this, if I put a face-to-face workshop, I would be doing it via Eventbrite, and then I would capture everybody's emails. So I would know exactly who was attending. So would it be much the same as what you're doing? You know exactly who's attending?
Exactly that.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay.
So what we do
So
is we register all attendances in advance.
Yeah.
We run it through a system actually on our site where people save their seats, so we know who's coming, and that's reason why, you know, we have someone who's doing Tori's job, who is checking the event registrations and ensuring that only registered people are allowed in, and we put a few other things in place as well. So I think in the case of that particular council thing, what happened is some people have been using the same Zoom link over and over again for meetings. Which, if it's an internal staff meeting, I can understand that. We use unique identifications for each meeting and passwords, which is similar to what's happened for this webinar today that's been set up by CAST. Equally, and this is a decision we've made, because we're working with young people, we've disabled mics and cameras completely, and we also have disabled the free chat box, which you can see is being used in this webinar. We instead have got something called the Q&A function, so young people are only able to send Q&A to effectively the Tory on our call. So we've closed down all the loops and places that there can be young people be seen. Now, the downside of that is, of course, that the interaction is a bit lower, but we're working with young people, and so we just want to be as safe as possible. So, used carefully, these services do provide you the ability to be incredibly safe. What I would say is, in terms of the site that you're using, we're currently using Zoom, but we are constantly reviewing what the best thing would be. Equally, in Scotland, the Scottish Government has banned use of Zoom because they had a similar issue with another of their council meetings, and they just decided we're just not using it. That was a policy decision they made, fine. So for our Scottish webinars, we use Teams. But as I said, we literally have a weekly meeting where we look at what's best, because things are changing so quickly at the moment, and services are popping up or changing their delivery models. So the best option is shifting all the time, and organisations like CAST are a really good place to go to find out what is the safest way of doing it. Zoom can be safe. People have made mistakes using it, but equally these things need to be kept under review.
Okay, lovely. Thanks ever so much.
No problem.
Fabulous. Thank you very much, Rosalind. And thank you for sharing so generously your experience of working this change and your learning as well. And I really want to ask people who are on this call to pay that forward as you go forward, because it's only through the learning, through the sharing of the learning and being open about that we can all continue our learning as well. You've picked up on some really good points, and quite a few of them I'll be mentioning as we continue in this call as well. So thank you very much for your time, Rosalind.
No problem at all. I will disappear. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye. So we looked at, we heard from Rosalind about thinking about your users. And that's something that you need to do as well. So what is it that you know about your users' needs? And you will already know your users quite well. But what you want to think about is, have their needs changed at all during this lockdown? You know, are they different from before? And you also might want to think about learning some more about their relationship with technology and online learning. Because if you haven't delivered that before and you haven't worked with your users through technology, you might not know enough about that. So things that you want to ask yourself are, who are your users? So as you heard from Rosalind, there was an extra set of users that she gained through COVID-19. So all of a sudden, parents became users as well. Think about, are your users service users or are they professionals? And who influences their life? Is it the parents or is it an organisation that they work for? Think about how they engage with technology, how much time they have available, what are their motivations to engage with your learning, and what support might they need to go through your learning as well, through your training. So as well as thinking about your user needs, you also want to have a quick think about what you actually know about face-to-face learning. So having done an introduction earlier, I know that all of you know a lot about learning and learning development. So I just want to take a couple of minutes in Miro. So we'll have to go back into your browser. And I just want to have a look with you at what you know about face-to-face training and learning. So what do you know about what works? What are the principles that you design learning on? And to get to the right square, you just follow the arrow down from the fears and opportunities box. There we are. I think we're going. So we've got two there on learning styles, absolutely. Those are really important when you design training to make sure that you cater for all the different learning styles. Making it interactive, yes, absolutely, to keep people engaged, really. Have an opportunity to express emotions and share empathy. So there is something about that kind of connection to other participants and the trainer as well. Thinking about barriers to learning, having group discussion, because that can be really powerful, can't it? Because all your participants will come with their own knowledge and their own experience on the topic, and giving them an opportunity to discuss that knowledge, they can really learn from one another. And also having discussion can really help to build on learning and on new information that you're presenting to your learners. Use of props, work groups, role plays, and manage distractions, keeping the focus. So there is loads there, isn't there? So you have a really good sense of what's needed to design face-to-face learning. And I just want to say that you don't want to lose sight of that. So once you start playing with the tech, it can be easy to lose sight of what you know about developing training already, because most of that on that board will be translatable, will be usable for your online learning as well. So let's go back to our slides. So as well as thinking about what we know about face-to-face learning, let's have a look about what we know about online learning. And there's just a couple of things that I want to highlight that we need to take into account when we design for online learning before we move on to the next principle. One thing that we know when we design and deliver face-to-face training is that your participants need to be comfortable to be able to focus on their learning. And I think we all know how important lunches are, having a room with good daylight, comfortable chairs, having enough air in a room. All those things are really important. And if your people in the room, if your participants aren't comfortable, then it will be more difficult for them to focus on the learning. Now, the same is true for online learning. I think we can all say that our screen time has gone up since lockdown. And for some of us, it can be quite crowded at home, with kids at home, partners at home. So we really want to think about designing for flexibility, which can really increase comfort in terms of engaging with learning. So you want to make it as easy as possible to fit learning in for your participants. And sometimes it can be easier to access a 5-minute video or podcast while you're making your lunch and then doing a quick 10-minute exercise before you join like a 40-minute Zoom call, rather than joining a live 2-hour call. Yeah. So Zoom, totally okay, and a really useful tool, or video calling, whichever platform you use. But it can be quite hard to get everybody in the same place at the same time, especially for a longer time period. That makes that face-to-face live calling quite a valuable high-ticket resource for you that you really want to make the most of when you use it. So you want to either record it like we do and then reuse that, or you want to use it for that really important group connection. You know, you've already said in face-to-face training, it's really important to have discussion together, to be able to reflect together, to think together and do that peer support. And video calling can be a really good tool for that. So the other thing you want to think about is mix it up. So we know from the face-to-face that it's important to mix things up to make sure that you cater for all learning styles and also to keep people's attention. So you want to do the same when you deliver online training to keep it interesting. So you want to have a mix of available options. So you can have the Zoom calling, you could have exercises, you could have pre-recorded videos that maybe you do yourself, or you can point to videos on the web. You could have pictures, quizzes. There's a whole host of things that you can try. And it's good to mix that up. And the thing to think about with recorded videos, they've done some research on at what point people stop watching a video, and it tends to be around 7 minutes in online learning. So anything that goes wildly over those 7 minutes is just too long. And that gives you a sense of how quick you have to mix it up. And I'm sure you do the same as I do when you look at videos on YouTube, how-to videos. The first thing I do is look at how long they are. If they're half an hour, I don't bother because I just can't sit through it. So those are things to remember. So where you want to start is record all this, what you know about your users and about online learning and learning. Capture it in a knowledge board and capture what you know, what you think you know, but that might be an assumption and it might be wrong, and what you don't know. And this workbook, this knowledge board is in your workbook, so you'll have access to that. Now, once you fill that in, you will want to do a little bit of user research on what is your most risky assumption or your most risky unknown. And I'm just going to cover user research very briefly because we haven't got a lot of time for that today, but there are other resources out there that can teach you more about user research. So currently, in the current time we're in, we don't have a lot of time, not necessarily a lot of resource to do user research, and we want to get going pretty quickly to meet our user need. So we suggest find 3 users that you can ask 3 questions of, and only do that for 15 minutes each person. Now, normally you would ask about 5 people, and research tells us that if you talk to 5 people, you can find out 85% of what you need to know. So if you have time for 5, go ahead with that. But if not, use the 3x3 rule to get a steer. Now, a couple of things to know about user research. Don't ask people about future behavior. We're really bad at predicting that. That's why we have gym memberships, and a lot of people don't go because we think we will, but we don't. But ask people about what they have done in the past or what they're doing now. So describe your day to me. Talk me through your day. Talk me through what tech you use at what point during the day. Tell me about what online learning you've accessed in the past. And the other thing you want to think about is don't ask yes/no questions. Make sure you ask open questions. So that's all I'm going to say today about user research. But there is a lot more information out there, and Tori delivered a webinar yesterday on how to get your services online, and that covered user research in quite a bit more detail, and that will be available online, that recording. So before we move on, I just want to check if there are any questions at this point. And I'm looking at Tori for that. No? Fabulous. Let's move on then. So the next thing we want to look at is building for sustainability. And we heard Rosalind say that already, haven't we? Because you're going to put time and effort into this. You want it to be sustainable. Now, the real beauty of online training is that you can build for sustainability. But what does that mean in practical terms when you're designing your online learning? So how can you build something that lasts beyond COVID-19? Really is the question. And you want to think about scalability and repeatability. So the opportunity is, as you said at the beginning of this session on the Miro board, is to reach more people with less work eventually. So if you have a 5-hour face-to-face training and you replace that with 5 hours of video calling, then when you repeat that course, you have to do the whole thing again. So you have to do your prep and then your full 5 hours again. So it might feel easier to get started to do it all through video calling because you don't have to do as much development. But longer term, that will take you more effort. So you want to design your learning experience so that you can repeat it and also that you can iterate it with the least effort. So if one element of your learning doesn't work, you want to make sure that you can tweak that individual element and you don't have to do the whole thing again. So reuse your resources is really important. So if you can create something that once you can go back to face-to-face, part of your online resources you can use to complement your face-to-face. So it might be that you can send out an email beforehand with a video or a workbook or some reading for people. And maybe you can give them access after the face-to-face course to an online toolbox. Then you can reuse what you've created during this time. Or it might be that you go to a completely blended way of learning. You're doing half of the course online and half of it face-to-face, and things go back to more of a normal situation. So the easiest way for you to plan for scalability and repeatability is to divide your current course, your face-to-face course, up into the smallest individual building blocks that you can. And those individual building blocks you can then use and reuse and mix and match as your course will change over time. And have a think about what can participants do without you being present in a live capacity. So you can think about short videos introducing some new knowledge, short pieces of reading, short podcasts, and all of those participants could access without all having to be in the same place at the same time. So having some of your course self-serve like that also means that it will be easier to reach more people, because you will have to spend less time in live calls, so you can repeat it more often. So you'll find this in your workbook. What you'll see here is that on the left, you can write down all the different course elements, your face-to-face ones, and break it down to what the one question is that small chunk answers. So that's kind of how small you want to break it down. And then you can think about, what delivery options have I got in terms of digital? And think about what learning style you cater for. So once you've filled this in, you can review whether you're catering for enough different learning styles. So that's about sustainability. Are there any questions about this at this point? No. Okay, let's move on. So this is another thing that Rosalind said. Take small steps and learn as you go. And in yesterday's webinar that Tori did, we also had a case study. And one of the things that was said there was fail fast. And that really kind of stuck with me, because we're all going to make mistakes in this, and it's best to do it quickly and do it while it's still small and easy to correct. So don't take ages to build something big that then is too big to fail. And also, I think it's worth remembering that it's kind of a period of grace in terms of moving things online at the moment, because everybody is trying it and everybody's learning at this point in time. So very briefly about constant iteration and taking small steps. So at the top, you see how not to do it, at the bottom how to do it, and the user need we're looking at here is getting from A to B without walking. So at the top, you might start to build a Rolls-Royce, and it will have amazing wheels, great chassis, upholstery is going to be really fancy, super light, and it will take you a long time to build. And once it's released, your users will be relatively happy with it, because, you know, it's a nice car. But all the while you're building that car, your users will still have to struggle to get from A to B while walking. So you haven't delivered any value for them while you're building, and they've also haven't given any input into the design. So they haven't given any feedback and tested it. So the example below, you don't start building a car, but you give them a skateboard to start with. And they go away, try out the skateboard. They go, no, you know, I need a bit more control over the steering, and I need some help with the balance. So you put some handlebars on it and it becomes a scooter. Now, your user moves further away and has to actually travel further. So A to B becomes a longer distance. And they'll need a bit more propulsion to get from A to B. So you build them a bike. Then they're having trouble with their knees, and they need something else than a bike, because a bike is becoming difficult, and you build them a motorbike. Now things might change again. They might have kids, or they might get fed up with the rain or the cold, and at that point you build them a car. So that means that all the while you're developing, you're in contact with your user, you're getting constant feedback, they get value from you, and you might end up with a car in the end, or you might not. It might be that a bike is the thing that that does the job. But what you do is that you front load the risk, and you also get proof of the concept. So in terms of kind of testing your online learning, you'll have material because you've already got a face-to-face course, but you might not know whether people want to come to an online course. So you might want to test that with a skateboard that's just a one-page website with a bit of blurb about your training and a button. And you can test whether people sign up. Sorry. So let's have a think about being really pragmatic and taking small steps then with face-to-face learning. So you also want to think about, in terms of being pragmatic, what resources you have available internally. So what time have you got? What money have you got? What knowledge have you got internally? And Rosalind already talked about that. In your workbook, there is an asset mapping exercise that you can do. And you also want to have a think about what kind of face-to-face course you're trying to replace. So let's imagine it's a 1.5 hour workshop. What you don't want to do if you're trying to replace a face-to-face 1.5 hour workshop is design a really big online course on a website. It's just not needed. But what you might consider is have an 1.5 hour webinar and record it so you can reuse it, or you can edit bits in and out and reuse bits of that recording. Or you could consider sending a preparation email with a link to an online video people can watch, or doing a bit of reading and only having a 40-minute webinar. Now, if you have a 5-hour workshop, you kind of don't want to replace it with straight 5-hour Zoom call. We've already talked about that. But what you could do is have a preparation email again with a video or workbooks and reading, and then splitting it into 2 times an 1.5 hour webinar. Or you could think about creating a quick online portal with content for people to go through, and a 1-hour Zoom session, and maybe some peer-to-peer support options around that as well. Now, what about if you have a 4-week program, kind of 1 day a week that you run? Again, you don't want to replace it with 8 hours straight Zoom calling for 4 weeks, really. But what you could do, again, is you could think about emailing weekly content and then having a Zoom session with some peer support options, or you could host that rather than an email, have it on an online portal. So you can see that you want to be pragmatic and think about your own resources, what it takes to get it up and running, but also what it takes to continue running it. So any questions about that? No, okay, let's motor on. So understanding what's out there first. So as much as possible, we want to reuse what's out there and build on what's out there. So what can you learn and borrow from others, and what's out there that's free? I'm sure that's something that a lot of you wonder about. When you start looking at what's out there, it's really important to remember not to get too carried away. Think about your skateboard, because there's a lot out there to look at. There's quite a few systems out there that universities and companies use to manage large numbers of courses and large numbers of students. Now, most of you won't need that. Some of you might have had experience of those systems. So I've been through HR prescribed training with previous employers, and they definitely have used those kind of systems. My experience of them is that they haven't always been the easiest to use or the most engaging, but then the motivation wasn't the topic necessarily. It was that it was a requirement on the job to get through that training. If you want an online platform where you host your learning, where people can log into, so like a classroom, if you like, then it might be worth looking at the options that are out there at the moment for entrepreneurs. They are, over the whole, fairly easy to use. It's drag and drop. You don't have to know any coding. There's lots of options out there. Really good for creating a skateboard course that still looks good. And the options out there include things like Teachable, Udemy, Skillshare, Kajabi. You'll be able to get a free trial for most of them, and some of them have free options like Thinkific, which is the one we've used. It gives you 3 courses you can host for free. So it gives you an opportunity to create a prototype for free. The thing to know is that those platforms have very much been designed with marketing in mind and pipelines and paying customers. And if that's not what you need, you just ignore all that. You just leave it to one side. So most of those platforms will enable you to do things like add videos into the classrooms, embed YouTube videos, upload PDFs, submit assignments, have discussion forums, do things like quizzes and surveys. So it's all set up for you to drag and drop information into that. If you have the capability internally to build that onto your own website, then that's an option. At CAST, we've chosen not to do that because it takes time and also because we're very busy at the moment. So we've decided to get something off the shelf and just quickly move our content into it. The other thing that you might want to consider is have a look at what training is available outside the sector. So it's not just looking at your competitors, but also what's being offered on Facebook, what's being offered by those small entrepreneurs in terms of online learning. And it might be worth just signing up to a few free ones to see kind of what platform they use, how they structure it, and what you like and don't like about it. So let's have a look at what our course looks like, and then you get a bit of a sense of what might be possible. So this is the front page where you go in if you haven't enrolled yet. It's got a bit of curriculum information there, a bit of info about the course, and if you scroll down, it would give you the different chapters. And then when people go into it, it looks like this. So it looks really basic in terms of navigation, so people can't get lost. So it's on the left, you see the navigation bar, and then on the right, you see the actual content. And you can see that the video is embedded on this page, so you don't have to come away from your course. What you can see as well is on the left, those are all the individual little building blocks of the course that we can repeat and reuse in different formats. And this is what it looks like at the back end. Now, it's not because we think Thinkific is so great that we're showing you this, but it's just to show you how straightforward a back end can look. It looks very similar to the front, and they're just buttons where you add lessons, and you can move the lessons just by dragging and dropping. There are issues with every platform you choose. There are things that it can and can't do. So for instance, with Thinkific, it's difficult to release the content at set dates. You can release it kind of 3 or 4 or 5 days after someone signed up, but if people sign up at different times, then you can't say next week, Tuesday, we want the second half of the course to be released. So just to cover other free resources and tools out there that we've used. You said face-to-face, it's important to have peer support and have discussion options. Now, online, you have a whole host of options, and it's good to stick with what you know, if you can, if that's the right option for your users. There's Facebook groups. There is Slack, which works quite well for professionals or for longer courses, I think. There's WhatsApp. There's Zoom, Google Hangout. So all those things can help in terms of peers connecting. If you're wondering about, well, how am I going to create video content? other than recording my Zoom live webinar. You can think of using something like Loom. It's a free resource. It's web-based, but you can download a desktop application, and you have different options there. You can just record your face. You can just record a screencast, so you can show people how to use something. Or you can do both. You can do a screencast, so you can do a presentation and have yourself in a little bubble somewhere floating on the screen so that people can still connect to you. The other thing that participants tend to quite like is having fillable workbooks, so PDFs that you can fill in. And in your workbook, I've set out how to go about that. It's really simple, really easy, and it just can add something extra to your course, can make it feel higher value, if you like. Thinking together, well, we've tried out Miro. I hope you enjoyed using that. It can work really, really well in terms of thinking together, especially if you do it more often. And then there's all sorts of tools out there to make things look good. So the images in this presentation come from Unsplash, and they're all free. So you can do away with your stock photo account. There's something called Canva, which is a really easy way to do graphic design, especially for online, because it makes things the right size for Facebook and Instagram, and it can really help with that. And they also have a whole selection of free images and photos. And then the other thing that might be useful, come to you in a minute, Ross.
Oh, right, yeah.
Yeah. The other thing that might be useful to think about is something like Hemingway app. It's a free app to help you write more clearly and more boldly. So it will help you with your copy, basically. Go on, Ross.
Just to say that we got Canva, you do have to pay for, but as a charity, we applied for free user accounts, and it was like a 5-minute form to fill in, and they gave us it within a week and a half. I think we got 10 free accounts, and it's so much easier to use than Publisher and stuff like that.
Fantastic. That's really great feedback, and that's such a good tip, especially now. It's worth contacting all those providers of apps that are useful for you to see whether they give a charity discount at this point in time. Absolutely. I think there is a free option for Canva, but it's limited in what it gives you. So it's worth going for that charity count, yeah. And it is so much easier to use than things like Publisher. It really is just drag and drop. And you can let your inner creative just go wild without having to know all the tech. Yeah. Are there any other questions about this? No, okay. So we're going to go back to our Miro board, and I am interested in what your next steps will be in terms of how are you going to get going? What is the next thing you need to do or the first thing you need to do to get your learning digitized? Great, we're really getting the hang of this Miro thing. It's lovely to see everybody moving things around and adding things. So we've got here trial and test various platforms. Yes, absolutely. Make sure you make some time just to try some platforms out. And I think if you haven't done that before, it can feel like it takes a bit of time, but it's really worth making that investment just to have a look at how things use. How intuitive does it feel for you? Does it give you what you need? Yes, work with your team to consolidate ideas. Absolutely, you need to have your whole team on board. Absolutely, Consult the learners, yes. User research, absolutely. Complete the table. So think about what the breakdown is of your day-to-day, your face-to-face training. Yeah. Be brave and go for it. Yay. Yes. And that's something actually that I think came from Rosalind's case study and also from yesterday's case study. Don't procrastinate too long. Get going on it, because now is the opportunity to do it, and just start small. Don't take too much time to and ah and look at all the different opportunities. Research best options, yes. Think about resources that you can invest. Absolutely. How much have you got to play with? And think about, you know, what's available for free as well. Yeah, co-production, do a test run. Yeah, fantastic. Excellent. So the next thing I would like to ask you is some feedback. And then after the feedback, we'll just run through some resources that are available for you and where you can get some further help. But before we go there, I would like to know what was useful about today's session, and what, if any, questions have you still got? Made it seem achievable. I'm really glad, because it is achievable. It absolutely is. Small steps, yeah, that's what makes it achievable. Yeah, thinking about delivery style, really important. Got some sense of available resources and tools to use. Clear and thorough. Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you for coming. Yes, it was very good having Rosalind come, wasn't it? And really hear firsthand what it was like for them. Yeah, you can fail, not a problem. You just need to move on quick and do it small. Fabulous. Glad it was easy to understand. It really doesn't have to be rocket science. Yes. Fabulous. Thank you very much for that. Let's hop back on to the Zoom screen and have a quick look at what further resources are available for you. So resources that are training. It's our online design hub. You already had a look at that. Time commitment for that is about 1 or 2 days whenever you want to do it. You can split it over 1 or 2 weeks. And there will be a trainer available for a Zoom session or one-to-one calls as well. And it will take you through the whole design process from beginning, user research, knowledge board, user research, and then prototyping. And then if you want to have a look at any further training that's available, have a look at the Catalyst website, because there are further options available there as well. So then a little bit about resources that are professional and peer advice. It is moving, good. So there is Digital Candle, which is a 1-hour consultancy with a digital expert, and it's free. So that's really a good one to know about, and you get matched pretty quickly, usually within 12 hours. There's Coffee Connections, and I see that there is a mistake on the slide. So it's Coffee Connections, and that's about connecting to peers in the charity sector. So that's about peer support. There is also Digital Charities Slack channel, and that's a peer learning chat network. So if you have any questions, you can just post them in that Slack channel, and someone will respond usually fairly quickly. If you aren't using Slack yet, I would really encourage you to have a go on it. It might seem, what's the point? I use email, but once you start using it, you won't be able to live without it. So let's have a look at some other tools then. There's some how-to guides on the Catalyst website. So it's on video conferencing, tips and tricks about working from home that are translatable to online learning as well. There is the charity catalogue, and that's a toolbox of loads of tech tools that charities have used, and quite a number of them will be useful for online as well. And don't forget about the workbook that's going to be emailed out to you. That's got all the exercises in, and it also has a whole list of resources with links in as well. So that's where I want to leave it. I really want to thank you for turning up. It's been, you've been really a lovely audience. It's been really nice to hear your questions and hear what you're doing in your organisations. We've got 5 minutes. So if anyone has any last questions, now is your chance. Or you can always email us. Oh, Tori, yeah.
Yes, sorry, Joyce. There's a question in the chat from, I think, Lindsay, around, it kind of sounds like a question maybe for the group, which is that, yeah, do people have a sense that online will be a more permanent move post-COVID, as it makes more sense for reduced travel, climate impact, and just more availability for us?
Okay.
So yes, I didn't know if that's something that we could potentially talk about as a group. Ruth, it looks like you said that you're already discussing this at work, or did you mean Slack? It's kind of around the same time as Joyce was talking about.
Okay, so Tori, you're breaking up a little. I can't actually hear it very well. I don't know if that's the same for others. Yeah, it's the same for others. So I heard that there might be a question from Lindsay and there might be one from Ruth. Would you like to take yourselves off mute and let me know what the question or comment is?
Yeah, I think, Joyce, I was just saying in the chat there that whether people have a sense that online will be a more permanent move after this. I mean, it's something that we've all had to get used to very quickly, but actually, I mean, we're a national charity. We're based in Cornwall. That means we do an awful lot of travel, and that, in terms of sort of our climate impact and things like that, we're trying to think maybe this is a more permanent move. And actually, now that we've got used to this way of working, whether that's something people will be more happy to engage with in the future. And I just wondered whether other organisations, I mean, some people mentioned that actually for some of their beneficiaries, this more personal one-to-one online might be more effective than having to get somewhere to meet. And, it just feels like there's opportunity within this that is sensible for us all to be considering at the moment.
I think that's a really good point. Absolutely. And I think the need for some face-to-face is never going to go away, is it? For certain things, face-to-face is just better. But I think we're learning now that there's an awful lot you can do online as well. And the investment we're making now, I think we'll keep using quite a lot of that, once lockdown gets lifted and we're post-COVID-19, absolutely. Yeah. And I think for sustainability, you really want to think about that as well. So if you break your training down in small enough chunks, then you can reuse it more easily as well and mix and match it going forward. Yeah. Was there another question or comment?
I made a comment on about going forward. The project I work on within the charity I work for we have 29 different partners, which has always caused problems in getting together. So we've started fortnightly meetings via Zoom or Teams, where we just come in at a certain time, give our piece, everything's recorded so you can watch the whole thing afterwards. And that has been so much easier. I'm actually seeing people that I've never had chance to see before, and we're really keen to continue that. So that's worked really well for us. I can't honestly see us going back to the old way of all trying to find somewhere that's big enough for all of us to meet.
Yeah, that sounds really good, Ruth. And it's just a really good example of how this can work out really well. And it feels like you're all trying to make the most of this opportunity, really, in terms of trying out different ways of working and seeing what the benefits are and taking those forward. Yeah, thank you. Any other questions or comments before we say goodbye?
It's Sue from Fans here. Sorry, I've lost a few people on the screen. I noticed in the chat there was a query about charging for online training. You know, I don't know what the feeling is about that, and if there's any recommendations out there or ideas on taking it forward. Just to think about income generation, it sounds quite mercenary, but with the charity sector we are at the moment, it is looking for, you know, funding constantly.
Yeah, I think that's a really great question, Sue. I think it depends on who your users are. So who are you marketing this at? Are you marketing this at service users as a service that you already get funding for? Or are you trying to sell learning to other professionals to whom you might sell training already face to face? So I think it depends a little bit on that. Yeah, and it might be that for some services you offer that aren't to professionals, you could charge for as well. But I think it's something that you need to do user research for, and you need to think about what your organization's position is.
Yeah.
No, so it's kind of hard to say anything about that. Yeah.
Yeah, our situation is that we are commissioned for a certain group of people, so health and social care professionals in Derbyshire. So we'd already started looking at income generation for people who don't fit into that group. So professional organisations, maybe companies who want drug and alcohol advice in Derbyshire, but also outside Derbyshire. We were already looking at income generation, and one of the ways was through maybe a webinar type, a Zoom type thing. But this situation's just pushed us on. So we're definitely looking at there's going to be pricing for some, pricing not for others, and higher levels of pricing depending whether things are charities, businesses, based on realistically what we think people will pay for it. And obviously there might be organisations that we take a hit on, and there's organisations where we will make a profit on. So how much we're charging, I think, is going to be up and down in the same way it's up and down for our face-to-face training. Some people get it for free, some people get it for a discounted rate, some people we charge, you know, a market rate for. So that's our situation at the moment, and that's going to go ahead with whether it's Zoom or face-to-face. There's going to be different pricing structures based on what we think the benefit to our organisation is, and also what we think the organisation are willing to pay.
That's really great. Thank you for sharing that, Ross. That's excellent. Okay, so thank you everyone for turning up. It's been really great hearing about what you're doing in your organisations. If you have any further questions, don't hesitate to drop us a line, and do have a look through the workbook and all the resources available.